I want to talk about paint and glazes and what the differences are between this and this and this. And basically the difference is the ratio of pigment to binder. So paint is made up of pigment, which is the colored part, and binder, which is the stuff that holds the pigment to the surface. And to illustrate that, I'm going to use glitter glue. Glitter glue is made up of glitter, which is the pigment or the colored part, and clear glue, which is the binder. Without the binder part, the glitter glue would be loose glitter. So in the same way, paints are made, and without the binder part, paint would be just a pigment powder or a mixture of chemicals depending on which grade of paint you get. So these two are paints, and the difference between this and this are pigment to binder ratios. So this is a better acrylic paint. This has more pigment and less binder, so you get a really dense color. Folk art is kind of a medium grade craft acrylic. It has less pigment than this and a little more binder, but it has more pigment than this, which is Anita's acrylic, which is the cheapest, lowest grade acrylic paint that you can get. This is Golden Glaze. The difference between this and this is that this, in theory, has more binder and less pigment. So in this case, the binder is a glaze, which is a clear acrylic, and it's designed to be transparent or translucent depending on the color. This is designed as a paint, but honestly, it has such a low pigment load that sometimes I substitute Anita's acrylics for glazes. So you can see pigment and binder in action in a container of paint that hasn't been shaken for quite a while or that is particularly old. And I'm sure you've all experienced this. You get the clear liquid leaking out, and then you get really thick paint coming out. This is probably a container of paint that's past its prime. So when you buy paints, you always want to shake them up like this. And if, when you turn them over, you can see the binder floating around down here, or if it, hear that sound? It sounds like something that's hard rather than paint. It doesn't sound liquidy. That's because the pigment has all accumulated and separated from the binder, and at a certain point it gets really thick, and it doesn't want to mix with the binder anymore. So this is probably a tube of paint that I want to get rid of. This is a practice book, one of my altered books that I use to do samples for classes and such. And I'm going to show you the difference between yellow ochre craft paint and yellow ochre glaze. So, always shake your paints before you start up with them. And this is, because it's an earth tone, it really does, in theory, have earth in it. And earth tones tend to clump up a little bit more quickly than other colors. So, this is a little old. And you can see that some of my binder didn't mix with the pigment. So I'm just going to mix it right onto the book. And this is, because this is kind of a medium quality paint, this is pretty dense. It's doing a good job of covering the text on the page, but you can see through it a little bit. And if I spread it thinner, you can see a little bit more. And if I leave it thick, you see a little bit less. That idea of seeing more or less through layers is called lost and found. And it's a good thing. Not being completely consistent and giving an even, regular coat of paint on a page or on a surface is a good thing because you want to create visual interest. Okay, so that's my paint. Pretty dense out here in the middle where I squeeze the paint out, and there's a lot of paint. And a little transparent out here where the paint got thinner. And I can probably move some of this paint out here to cover even more. So now let's try the same color of glaze. This is yellow ochre golden glaze. Golden makes great glazes, but you do have to sort of live with the color palette that they offer. And you can see that this is very transparent. Lots more binder than pigment. So it's the same color, yellow ochre. It's using the same pigment, but because there's more binder, that's what it looks like. So what happens if we want something that's not as dense as this painted side that was done with the folk art, but something that has a little more coverage than this pre-mixed golden glaze? We can mix our own using paint and a binder, and that can be glazing liquid, or my preference is matte medium, but it can be any clear acrylic medium that you have. So let me just move this out of the way and get a fresh surface. This is another practice book. I have 3 of them going so that I can do stuff like this while paint is drying in one book. I can move on to another. So I'm going to mix up my own glaze, and I call this glazing on the fly because you really can just mix as much as you need to do one set of book pages. So a little bit of my paint and kind of an equal amount of the glaze, which in this case is matte medium. Let's just see how that looks. And if I want it to be a little denser, I can add in a little more paint. And as long as I keep working this while it's wet, it blends really nicely. You don't want to let it get too dry because then you end up with streaks. There. So now we have, this is pre-mixed glaze. This is the glaze I mixed myself over on the right. So you can see that this one has quite a bit more pigment in it, quite a bit more color to it, but it's more transparent than the paint. One thing that those of you who are shy about pattern and mixing color can do is just glaze a page, and then while it's still a little damp, just use a brush, or this is a makeup sponge, to apply paint. And I'm just using the paint that's left over from mixing the glaze. And I'm just breaking up my surface. And since this book has pictures on it, I'm knocking down the pictures a little bit. And maybe I'm knocking down the header a little bit. And you can do this to frame the page, go around the outside, and create kind of a random pattern with your sponge around the outside to frame it. So now, without really using more than one color and some matte medium, you have a much more interesting background than you did when you just painted the page.